And I think we will get all right, let's get started. So, welcome everybody to Word on the Street. This week Jeremy is away, and so we like to sometimes joke that we are the wonk and the hack. The hack isn't here this week, so it's just the wonks are going to play. We're just going to totally nerd out on what is happening in Gaza, what we might expect in terms of the ceasefire. Is it going to hold? And more importantly than holding, is there also, well, maybe actually I should say holding is the most important thing because thankfully the fighting has stopped, at least for now. And so that is a big question. Can it hold? The more important question that comes after can it hold is, can we really build on it? Or are we going to be in the same pattern we've been in for years and years in Gaza? Or is maybe this time different? Maybe because things were just so absolutely horrible and for the last 2 years, is there an opportunity in the aftermath to actually mobilize the world in a way we haven't? So I still see folks are flowing in. Please hit that like button, and that helps us with our getting more folks to watch this. You're here on Word on the Street, and so let me tell you who we have with us today, because Sam Sutton is somebody I've worked with for a long time. We worked together on the negotiations John Kerry led 12 years ago. She was then stayed at the State Department and at the UN, working on these issues throughout both the Obama and Trump administrations. And after that, ended up back at the White House, actually, during the Biden administration, working on Israeli-Palestinian issues on October 7th. And in the year afterwards, Sam is one of those people who, those government officials you maybe don't know that much about, but they actually are the most in people running these policies. Sam is one of those people. Absolutely. And, as the director for Israeli-Palestinian affairs at the White House, the NSC, I mean, that is the person who is really responsible for all things Israel-Palestine on a daily basis. And she was in that role on October 7th, where suddenly I think that job really, really, really changed. And was also still there on January 20th and January 19th of 2024, or no, 2025, when there was a negotiation on and a deal on the last ceasefire, and was part of the team that was in Doha during those discussions. So, Sam, welcome to Word on the Street.
Thank you. And I think that the one thing you left off was you actually were my adjunct professor in grad school.
Yes. No, that's true. Yeah, I take
So,
pride in the fact that, I helped hire you into that first job at the State Department. So,
yes, you did. I owe you my first job, at the State Department. Well, it's good to be here. Thank you.
yeah, no, and it's great. So, Sam, let's get rolling. So look, you actually have worked on these kinds of negotiations before for the past 10 years. What do you make of what you've seen over the past couple weeks, and especially with JD Vance coming to Israel, all these follow-on negotiations, the flare-ups over the weekend? Where are we?
So I want to be hopeful. I've worked on these issues. I was a career government person for almost 15 years working on Israel-Palestinian issues. I had hoped to stay on, but to continue on working on these issues when we got the first hostage deal in January. But things did not necessarily work out. But I am hopeful. I have had a front row seat in January of 2025 when the Biden and Trump administration sort of worked together hand in hand. It was Brett was out in Doha, and then Witkoff joined, and it was I think that deal would not have been signed without the both of them. So I have seen Witkoff in action, and he's incredible what he can do. I am very hopeful about this deal, but I am very cynical as someone I have not worked on these issues that long, but I just know how hard it is and how complicated it is. And I worry that the jump to phase 2 is far more complicated than folks are letting on.
Yeah, and I would say 10 years is a long time to work on these issues almost nonstop. So I wouldn't sell yourself short on on that point. But yeah, I mean, on phase let's talk just a little bit more about phase one. What do you make of the, the fact that Rubio is there, that Vance is there, that they're all coming there? I'll tell you, like, part of what I sometimes think when I see that is it's an old play when you're worried about the Israelis or you're worried about either of the parties messing with you. You send one senior official after another to the country to make sure nothing happens. And so it feels we got a little bit of that going on right now.
Yeah, and I mean, backing up a little, I just am so having, uh, you know, worked on these issues for 2 years, spent a lot of time with the hostage families, and just in those issues, the fact that we were able to get all living hostages out, and then before that, Idan Alexander, I think it's just incredible, and I didn't know that we would get to this place, so I think that is really amazing. I think now it is clearly starting to get harder, but I think it shows a real level of commitment that Jared and Witkoff are out there. And then, as you said, as Vance and I think Secretary Rubio is coming tomorrow. Um, so I think that shows that we are serious and that maybe we're in the driver's seat. I don't know, but it seems possible that that is sort of how things are moving along right now.
Yeah, maybe we should talk a bit more about the hostages just because I know I mean, this is one of the things you were doing, right? Like when you were talking to the hostage families regularly, when they came through the White House, it was your job to escort them in and out, set up the meetings, talk to them, take meetings that other folks weren't taking. You were taking every single one. So how did it feel to see them come out?
It's unbelievable. I was just as we were sitting here, and it's funny, just as a sidebar, when I finally was, not in government anymore, I wanted to take a break from these issues for a little bit, and I'm started this job at Columbia, and this is still consumes my work, but also my personal life. It's just so hard to break away from these issues. So as I was earlier today, I was going through the embassy Flickr page, U.S. Embassy Flickr page, of Witkoff and Jared's recent meeting with the released hostages, and there's like 48 pictures, and I don't even know people who probably don't even know how to find this page, but I was just going through, and I mean it's so emotional. It was so emotional for us, and I think we really saw these families in their darkest moments. We were not there for the positive uh meetings and having their families out. So I think, Jake Sullivan and Brett would meet our team that led this, and I think others as well, and other buildings would meet with these families, once or twice a month in person. So it was really, we got to know everyone very, very well. And it was just so emotional. And it's emotional now seeing this. On my social media, I'm just consuming it all because I'm not there in person, and it's just so unbelievable and amazing. And I recall one moment when we were in Doha, sitting with, the Israeli team had people who were just they had a whole team and that knew everything about everyone who was in there. And when we seemed like we thought we were getting close, I remember sitting with one of the Israelis, and going through each of these details. And these were details that they had kept close hold about some of the folks. And I couldn't even, I felt, I was like, I was started crying, and I didn't want to show that because, my boss and everyone else, but it was just so emotional to think about these people. And we just, anyways, it is so amazing to see that that many of these, I mean, I hope that we get everyone out, but the folks that were alive are able to now be with their families and are out.
And can I ask you one other question actually about Doha? And I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, so feel free to just be like, no, I don't want to answer that. Uh, but it's interesting. One of the things that's been made a big deal of is the fact that Witkoff and Kushner, and if you watch the interview, sat down directly with the Hamas negotiators at the end. I mean, did you all ever do that, or are you surprised, or do you think it makes sense, or like what was your take on watching the coverage of that?
So I mean, to my knowledge, and again, I was not the most senior by far, so I was more of a staffer role. But to my knowledge, we did not. I am conflicted, and I've actually given this thought at the time. I sort of I made the case to my leadership that I didn't know how productive it would be, because our positions were pretty clear, and I thought they would just drag us into trying to litigate things because it would be a first meeting, and I don't know. I didn't think it would be that useful, but I think that the Trump team is less constrained, and it's a different dynamic. And a lot of times when we were in Doha, we were waiting around. A lot of it's funny. My husband tells me that I had a baby. He was 10 months old, and my husband says that I spent 2 months of his 10 months on Earth in Doha. But a lot of that time was just waiting in hotel rooms while there was shuttling back and forth, waiting, all of that. So if you can cut that out, it's far more efficient. And I think when this team has much more, is less constrained, I see that obviously there's great utility in that.
Yeah. I mean, although to be also, I think, fair to you all, and us, it it was at the very end that those meetings happened when so many of the gaps had been bridged, and you were
Yeah.
just getting to the point at the end. I can also see the point where when you're too early, it doesn't necessarily make sense because then you just dive into the weeds on everything in a situation that it doesn't make sense. So I can see it from both ways. Although generally, I think it's kind of good that they've broken that
Yeah.
taboo because now the taboo is broken. So sure, any future administration can work on this and maybe do this now. Um, but let's start to pivot on. So let's talk about phase two. Um, and I think maybe I'll start with a little bit about my take on where I think this goes or where it can go, at least the positive. We can also talk about the negative because I think there's a very high probability it goes nowhere. And we're just kind of back. Well, let's say that, we're just back in the world of, I think I wrote a paper just a few days after October 7th when we were at the White House and I was looking at two scenarios. And one scenario was what you might call Janine on steroids. Basically, Israel is still in large parts of Gaza, Hamas still controlling Gaza and being responsible for security, Israel conducting operations as they needed to, humanitarian aid getting in, but that is it. Nothing beyond the humanitarian aid in terms of actual reconstruction and rebuilding. And that's a very likely scenario, probably the most likely scenario if nothing changes. The alternative scenario is to try to actually build something better. And that starts not with everybody's talking about disarming Hamas, but I feel like disarming Hamas is the last step in the process. It's about replacing Hamas. Replacing Hamas, and the way you do that is by building an alternative security mechanism. You actually have folks who can provide security on the ground that are not Hamas and alternative governance. So, and then if you're able to do that successfully, you put Hamas in a corner and Hamas at that point surrenders or does the disarmament. That's really, really hard to do. The reason Hamas agrees to any of this is because they're in a box and they feel like they have no choice but to agree. And they feel like they are essentially trying to do what Hezbollah did for years, which is, okay, as somebody else can govern and be in control, we'll keep our guns and then we can continue. And that's what Hamas does. And then we, the United States, the international community, Israel, others, Palestinian Authority, need to outgovern and outsecure them, like we have done, for example, in the counter ISIS campaign, and win that competition. And maybe there are some advantages, especially because, in Gaza, there's no free flow of weapons the way there was into Lebanon, where Iran was just flying stuff into Damascus and from there shipping it into Lebanon. So that is the idea as I see it for phase two and the beginning of how you do this. Um, but how realistic do you think any of this is, Sam? And maybe let's start with the challenges with the international security force, which is the first part. Maybe explain to folks a little bit about that and how you see this, or just how realistic you see the whole thing, and then we can break out into different pieces.
So, and we, together did a lot of work on this. When I think about this, it always comes back to the PA. And I know we've talked about this, but I think, we are in almost the same position we were in vis-a-vis anything for the day after that we were 2 years ago, which is the Israeli government saying no PA, no Hamas, and probably no Israel will be governing. Um, I think the role that the PA plays in all this is critical to the vision that you just laid out. And if the Israelis are still saying the PA can't be there, uh, I just I find it hard to believe that we will be able to build an entity that's a completely new entity. Um, so I think that as the PA will have to be a part of this within the PA security forces and the PA civil administration that is already there. Um, and I think that's key to all of this and key to getting it off the ground. Um, I don't know how serious the Israelis are when they say no PA and how much they will be pushing back on that.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if we have to break this out into three pieces, as I see it. There's where we are today,
Mhm.
which is just managing the ceasefire and trying to prevent it from collapsing, and that's the most important immediate thing to stopping the suffering in Gaza, getting more aid in. There's this phase of the next year, I would say, because we do have Israeli elections coming sometime in 2026. We don't know exactly when. The phase of the Netanyahu government continuing and this extreme right government continuing to be in charge, which means, no PA, for example, no long term, because the basic concept of PA in Gaza is unified Palestinian leadership, taking you towards eventual Palestinian statehood, all these things. Um, and so for that reason, I don't see us being able to make major progress, but maybe you can at least if Trump puts enough pressure on Netanyahu to do certain things, maybe you can make some progress, right? And then if you do get elections in a different government, maybe that's the moment to then lean in much further. But let's maybe do it piece by piece because I really want people to understand it, right? So there's security in the immediate and security in the long term. Security in the immediate is you're going to have to eventually train Palestinian security forces, but in the immediate, it's you need to bring in a temporary Arab force. That's what the plan calls for. So, or international force.
Yeah.
What do you think are the likelihood of that, or what are the challenges associated with getting this temporary international force in? Because we were also working on that a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I mean, I want to. I hate how skeptical I am, and
Mhm.
cynical I am, because I really genuinely want this to work. I think in an ideal situation, we have the ISF, and it's maybe even blessed by the UN, and it includes, I don't know, Indonesia, some of these other countries that have been referenced, and then they work alongside some passive and eventually transition over to the passive.
Palestinian security forces and ISF, International Stabilization Force.
Yes. Which is that, yeah, the what is the force is called in the President Trump's plan. I it I don't know how real conversations are now about countries contributing troops to this. I remember when we were having these conversations, it was very, very, very difficult. Now things have changed. So, um, m potentially, I think if you had um certain Arab countries, potentially Indonesia as well. I know Turkey has been discussed. I think Turkey might be a harder one for the Israelis to swallow. I think theoretically it could work, especially if we have our troops there as a troops. I mean our military presence outside that is helping to coordinate all of this. I think that's a huge role. And that's also something we discussed a year and a half ago. Um, Sort of the US playing this coordinating role with CENTCOM. Um, I think if this can be established as a transitional entity, I think a big question is whether the UN needs to be if there needs to be a Security Council resolution or a UN sort of like stamp of approval. Um, but the big thing is then transitioning eventually over to the Palestinian security forces.
Yeah, and I think right, that's the short term is getting the internationals in. The longer term is handing it off to Palestinians. And really from the very beginning, you're going to have Palestinians as part of this. You're going to want them on the ground. The way to think about it for people is kind of like the US counter ISIS campaign. We were not out in front anywhere in Iraq and Syria. We had local Syrians, local Iraqis, Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, if people remember that as the name of one group. They were out in front. US was behind, but we were providing training, support, enabling. And this international force is going to need to be able to do that to help Palestinians. But the other thing people need to understand here is that this force isn't going in to go into tunnels. That is not happening. Basically, there's going to have to be a deal where Hamas agrees not to fire at this force. Right? So Hamas agrees not to fire at this force because they can't alienate the Egyptians, for example, or the Qataris or the rest of the Arab world. And they think, well, we can manage. This force will be here, but we'll still keep our guns and we'll be fine. And this force starts to establish alternative governance and slowly brings in more Palestinians and hands it off to more Palestinians. And I do think one of the other things I always thought about the U.S. playing a coordinating role and the reason all these other countries wanted that is because they wanted us in the game. They wanted to believe that we were behind it. And if we are behind it, then it creates more insurance, especially from the Palestinians. Right? Not from the Palestinians, from the Israelis. Right? There was always concern that the IDF would see some Hamas terrorists and try to take something out, and in the process kill a bunch of Egyptians, which would be a disaster for everyone. And a lot of these countries felt if the Americans were really part of this, the likelihood of that goes way down. It's still, I mean, it's a massive stretch, and it's going to take a lot of agreeing from the Israelis too on everything. I mean, you know what it's like to try to get bullets into the West Bank for Palestinian security forces through Israelis, right? So there's a million different ways an Israeli government can resist this and undercut it, and that's even if these countries are willing to go in the first place. Uh, and yet, despite your pessimism, I would say this is what we have to try and do because I don't
Yeah.
see an alternative. You know, um,
Yes, exactly. And this is a far better place than an Israeli prolonged occupation. What we thought potentially was in the cards several months ago. Um, though I do have, and I know that I don't want to raise more questions, but just thinking this through as we're talking about it, particularly in the area in Gaza now that the Israelis have withdrawn out of, I don't know, but they sound like really nasty places at the moment, with Hamas just being ruthless. Is the idea that this stabilization force will be going in there? And I think not, right? But so how do we think about the policing in these areas?
yeah, I think they would have to go into these
Yeah.
areas, but the deal would be that Hamas is not going to fire that on them, and that would have to be worked out in advance. And
Yeah.
they would start there. The Palestinians working with them would start providing basic policing and just fundamental level security of people crossing streets not and not having people steal from each other and things like that, and just provide basic fundamental security
Yeah.
101 at a police level. But yeah, that's going to be brutally hard to do. And even harder now. Look, when we were working on this a year and a half ago, the idea was also always that if Israel and if the world had been working on this a year and a half ago and was more open to it, we could have started doing it while the war was still going on, right? We're kind of in this golden hour where the war has ended and there's this opportunity, but none of this is ready. And that is going to make it a lot harder than it would have had to be, and I remember us doing a lot of work on this and then having Israeli security and intelligence officials telling us we want to do more, we want to work with you, but we're constrained by our politics. Our leadership's not letting us do this because it would require admitting the end of this pathway is Palestinian control of Gaza, which doesn't really work for Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Maybe now, though, maybe Trump with the political leverage he has, Netanyahu, maybe he can get some steps in this direction. But I want to pivot us, Sam, to to the governance piece also, and cover that, because the idea is this interim security force and at the same time interim governance entity. So how do you see that being established? What kind of connection do you see? Take away the Israeli objection to the PA for a second, but also acknowledge we can't on moment one have the PA running all of Gaza. Like, what do you
Yeah.
see this transitional piece looking like?
It's funny. That's my biggest obstacle in talking about this is Israeli objections to the PA. But I think I think what has been as what has been reported and what was in the President Trump's plan is very similar in many ways to things that we had discussed. Which is the idea of somehow having some sort of a council with international stake in it, but a Palestinian led, not necessarily PA affiliated, but with strong PA involvement. It seems like that is also where I know there's talk of Tony Blair, but even if he was sort of on the outside, that's not that. Um, it wouldn't be like he was the mayor of Gaza or something. So I think theoretically it makes sense, and it's not far off from the ideas that we discussed. In fact, quite similar, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, and I'm going to respond on that, but just a reminder for folks, we're on Word on the Street, and I'm here with Samantha Sutton, who worked on Israeli-Palestinian issues throughout the Obama, first Trump, and Biden administration, was at the White House responsible for these issues on October 7th and the months afterwards. So we're really getting an insider view on, at least Sam and I spent a lot of time thinking about day after in Gaza and talking about day after in Gaza for a year and a half. And so this is what we're talking about right now and how this is going. Going back to the political structure and where things go from here, I always thought one of the important things that we did a lot of work on early and did research on, and maybe people didn't understand, is there are a lot of very capable, politically influential people in Gaza who are not
Mhm.
Hamas affiliated. You had municipalities with with mayors. You had key ministries, health, education, water, that were maybe had a Hamas political appointee at the top, but were really run by people. A lot of these people are now in Cairo. There is a group of people who can run Gaza together with the PA,
Mhm.
and or at least with PA representation at the beginning. And over time, the idea is maybe, especially if you reform the PA and take steps on the Palestinian Authority to strengthen its governance in the West Bank too, you can get there. That is the theory of the case. But we did a lot of work in those early months of really digging deep on what does local governance in Gaza look like and how you build it up. The other thing I'd say is, at the end of the day, Hamas is not going to be part of this government, but it's going to have to, the same way as they're going to have to agree to not fire at any security forces that go in, they're going to have to be okay with who is running Gaza. So they're going to have a role. People need to be just realistic about it, at least understanding they're going to have a nod and a say, even if nobody is directly associated with them. In many ways, if you do this, the way I've always thought about it is you got to stick all the factions in Cairo. You have all the Palestinian factions, including Fatah and representatives of the PA
Yeah.
and Hamas and others, technocrats and others, international community, Qataris, Egyptians, Turks, whoever, all banging heads. Israelis have to be okay with it too, right? And the United States, and ultimately coming up with this group. And that's probably how it's going to work, at least in the initial. But I do want to go back, having put the PA issue aside. Let's talk about this for a second, because we talked a lot about reforming the Palestinian Authority in the Biden administration is something the Israelis wanted, and trying to empower them. Uh, where do you think we are in that, and can progress there? Why has it not happened?
So yeah, we spent a lot of time on this. I think the PA has many issues. I think prisoner payment system is horrific, but we worked hard with them on trying to reform that. Um, I think that there are certainly the textbooks. I mean, these are issues. I know that people roll their eyes who have, but these are serious issues that need to be addressed. At the same time, I think that there have been consistent roadblocks to the PA ever really getting past, um, getting past where they are now. And I think I have real questions about whether the government of Israel would actually allow a strong entity. I think it would probably have to be a reform PA to to regain control of Gaza. I think you touched on this in the beginning, but I think it has long been a policy, or maybe not stated policy, of the government of Israel to sort of keep things separate, keep the government separate in the West Bank and Gaza, so that you don't risk a unified, strong Palestinian government that could actually become a state, to keep them split and weak. Um, I would say that was a failure, and we should probably try to pivot and push Israel to move in a different direction. Um, Ilan and I were part of a conversation last week with several Palestinian officials, and someone made the point that I think Israel is better positioned when they are surrounded by states rather than non-state actors. I don't know, there's a lot to read into that, but I do think in this case, I would hope that Israel would try to take a different tactic than what has been done for the past 20 years in terms of governance and, yeah, governance.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sam. I do think we've had this strategy, especially since 2009, but probably going back earlier, of empowering Hamas. Hamas gets, more money. Hamas gets money from Qatar in order to stop launching missiles at Israel. That is money that flies into Ben Gurion Airport. This was what was happening before October 7th for years. You'd have piles of cash fly into Ben Gurion Airport and be transported into Gaza. Qatari money, but the deal was between Qatar and Israel. Israel was fine with this. Israel was encouraging it at the same time that you're systematically punishing the Palestinian Authority, which, as you said, Palestinian Authority, lots of challenges, lots of problems. But every time you're taking away more money from them, and they're the ones who are saying, for all of Abbas's problems, and the guy is 88 years old or 89, and it's time for him to go, he has stuck to this idea of nonviolence throughout. It's been his theory of the case for 20 years, even as his society has increasingly gotten so frustrated. It also reminds me of something else. I remember this was years ago. We were working on this stuff for Carrie and with Martin, and Jonathan Schwartz, who's another one of these people, like Samantha Sutton, who nobody knows who Jonathan is, but he's the mystery man who was the lawyer for like 20 years. I'm outing him here in public at the State Department. But Jonathan is one of these people who just encyclopedic background in this issues, and going back to the Oslo days, wrote almost every agreement, was the lawyer. And I just remember him sitting in one of the sessions with Israelis and Palestinians where they were really bickering at each other. And he just looks at me and he says, this is the difference between now and the 90s. In the 90s, it was the Israeli moderates and Israeli and Palestinian moderates working together. They were helping each other. They were like, I'm going to do this for your politics. You do that for my politics. That's what Arafat and Rabin were doing.
Yeah.
And now we're such the opposite, where the extremists are building off of each other. The extremists on the Israeli side and the extremists on the Palestinian side are playing off each other, while the moderates are the ones who are, incredibly weak at the
Yeah.
moment. Maybe this is a moment where things begin to change and shift, but you're going to Israel needs to get over it and needs to just fundamentally shift on this. And if October 7th doesn't convince them, it's time to start empowering an alternative in Gaza and the West Bank that's more moderate. I just don't know if anything will. I want to take you, Sam, one last space, and then I think we'll close. What about Israeli politics and all of this? We talked about the PA, but you see any hope there for in the future?
So I am watching with great interest as all of this unfolds, because the government that we were working alongside or with when we were at the White House is more or less the same government that is there now, which is very hardline, very very extreme, in many respects. Again, going back to the PA, no PA, um, that government is the same government. But we are seeing what I hope are openings. Probably many of that, you know, because of President Trump and what he is able to sort of the power that he possesses with this government. But I think I I know you have said elections. I don't know. I feel like we've always, when we were in the White House a year and a half ago, it was that elections would happen soon. So it's hard to predict, but I do think that we were or Israel is heading into a more isolated, dark place these past few months. And I think that hopefully that is changing, and maybe that will influence. Maybe it's that some of these more extreme government officials are, marginalized, or maybe there will be political change.
Yeah, I mean, on this, can I ask? And I want to ask. You talk about Trump's leverage, and Trump's leverage really comes from the fact that he is so popular with Netanyahu's own base. But that's something Netanyahu is also cultivating. Uh, I sometimes find it frustrating when I see Trump get out there and completely contradict Netanyahu and force things down his throat, and Netanyahu is totally silent and lets it go. And when we were in office, if there was any kind of a misunderstanding between Joe Biden and Bibi Netanyahu, Bibi was out immediately playing it up. We talk about no daylight, but Bibi's strategy oftentimes with us felt like daylight on purpose for his own politics. So I don't know. How do you? Because I'll be honest with you, sometimes it makes me pretty angry. I don't know how you feel when you see that now as compared to how we got treated sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very interesting and at times frustrating to watch. But I think that the effect from President Trump vis-a-vis the Israelis and particularly the Israeli government is uh is real. One anecdote from that was when we were in Doha. And with the Trump team that was there, even though we were and alongside the Biden team, the Trump team was able to speak to the Israelis in a way that if my boss ever spoke to the Israelis would have been, uh, you know, it would have closed things entirely. So I think it really is. It's fascinating to see, frustrating, but also it's creating a window of opportunity that potentially real could happen with regard to this issue and the future for the Palestinians. Um, I guess I'm still cynical though, but
Well, no, I thought we were about to end on a very positive note when you saying with you saying, well, this creates an opportunity for change. And you're right. We should not be like, for all my frustration, I'm happy to see this. I'm happy to see progress on this. But then, I guess it's probably right that we should end with like, but I'm still cynical because we should all be realistic about this, that what we're describing is the best way forward, but it's going to be incredibly hard. And the more likely scenario really is that this is not where this is going to go. And more likely we're going to end up with that Jenin on steroids or Mogadishu in the Mediterranean, whatever you want to call it. But we need to keep pushing for the alternative because that's the best option out there. And there's a real opportunity potentially at this moment. So,
and we have to stay. The people have to stay hopeful. And I work still, although I'm not in government, alongside many Palestinians and Israelis, and they are the people I am around are hopeful and want to be hopeful, and that is inspiring. And all we can do is remain hopeful.
yeah. And you know what? You and I, even if we're being cynical on this call, like neither of us would have done this for 10 or 20 years,
Yeah.
however long we've both been working on this, if there wasn't ultimately a belief that we could make a difference and make it better. And people wouldn't be tuning into this and in this conversation and joining J Street if there wasn't a belief that we could make it better. And in some ways, that's the action is the best, consistently the best antidote and the best uh, cure for depression, sadness, frustration is actually trying to do something. So I want to say thank you to Sam for joining us. This was for everyone a word on the street. It's a week with no hacks, just wonks, going very deep on what is happening and these post conflict plans. I think as complicated as the war was, the peace might be just as complex, although thankfully better. I'd much rather be here than where we were a few weeks ago. And next week, I think will probably be just Jeremy joining us in the World Zionist Congress in Israel, and so stay tuned for more there, and keep following us, all of our different accounts. You catch this show if you missed parts of it on YouTube, on various Spotify, Apple uh, podcast, or just go to Substack, which should be up in an hour or two if you want to watch the whole thing. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us, especially Sam.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Now I got to figure out how to end this. There we go.